and welcome to this videocast for subscribers to davidicke.com. Well, as I'm recording this, they have announced an attempt to install a ceasefire of sorts in Syria, though the parties involved, the United States and Russia, don't seem to be too confident that it will go anywhere. And when you look at the history, with good reason. But whatever happens in the short term in relation to that, the long-term plan that I've been exposing since way back in the books and talks has quite demonstrably continued apace this week. And by that, I mean the clearly systematic demonization of Russia. What I've been saying all these years going, like I say, way back to a time when Russia was not considered a threat, when China was, it's joining the West now. It's becoming an economically Western country, and they're buying lots of things and all that stuff. Even then, what I was saying was that the plan of the global hidden hand was for a third world war between the West, predominantly, of course, led by the United States, against Russia and China. And of course, it's all dismissed by the mainstream. Oh, that Icke, he's a nutter. But now it's fricking happening for anyone with half a brain cell on active duty. The demonization of Russia in multiple ways is designed to prepare the global public to accept a conflict with that country, to protect the West. And after, like I say, all these years since I first started saying this was the global plan, we had this week the Pentagon announcing a list of the biggest threats to the world. Who was at the top? Russia. Who was second? China. A somber report released Wednesday by General Martin Dempsey, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Pentagon, warns of a low but growing possibility of the US fighting a war with a major power with immense consequences. It's the plan. It's always been the plan. And that plan is to create a third world war, to change the face of human society and introduce a completely different global society based on total control. Nothing changes the world more fundamentally or quicker than wars. Look at Syria, a prosperous, bustling country, now in an absolute mess, in turmoil, in tatters because of a war. The First World War, all planned, as I detail in my books, changed the world completely. The Second World War took it even further. And what was the common theme? Continual centralization of power after each war. And the plan is for a third world war involving the West and Russia, China, to complete the job of centralizing power on a global level, dictating to every man, woman and child on planet Earth. That is what it's all about. And so this Dempsey chap at the Pentagon said in this announcement revealing this list that Russia has repeatedly demonstrated that it does not respect the sovereignty of its neighbours and is willing to use force to achieve its goals. This man, like everyone involved in this in the United States and Britain, has no shame whatsoever. How they can talk about this stuff and say those words without choking is one of the great wonders of the world to me. When you consider that Britain and the United States and others like France have been bombing and destroying and taking over countries by force decade after decade after decade. Russia's military actions, he said, are undermining regional security directly through proxy forces. Proxy forces? He's got to be choking now, surely. United States and Britain uses proxy forces all over the place. It's using them now in Syria under code names like moderate rebels and ISIS, of course, which they're fundamentally behind. And it says here in this article that the 2011 report by the Pentagon spoke little of Russia. No, because this global takeover by this hidden hand has a sequence that it's following, has steps it's following. In 2011, the step to start demonizing Russia to prepare for a third world conflict wasn't at that point. Now it is, and so you're seeing this demonization, including a BBC film program based on the fact that Russia had basically invaded Latvia, and the NATO countries had to react to protect its sovereignty, and it ended in a nuclear exchange, all preparing the public mind for, be afraid of Russia. And NATO, of course, which is a world army under anything but directly being named as such, NATO's head said he approved the American proposal for a major increase in armaments and troops to be based in Europe. This also came out this week, in the wake of Russian aggression. And what he's talking about in terms of Russian aggression, of course, is Ukraine, where the West, brackets United States, Britain, NATO, all those usual suspects, imposed a coup upon Ukraine, removed an elected leader. He might not have been a nice man, but he was an elected leader, and put in their puppet, Poroshenko. And they've used that ever since to, again, demonize Russia. Now, I mentioned that the idea is to create this war, and then after the war, the idea is to say, look, we can't go on like this. So what we're going to have is a world army, which one journalist said to me once, well, he called himself a journalist, what's the use of a world army? There'd be no one to fight. How about the population and keeping the population under control? The idea to create the world army is to impose the will of what they want after this war, which is a world government. And the world army is being moved into place more and more and more under the name of NATO, among other things. And after this war that they're planning, we let them get away with it, they are going to announce some kind of peace deal, which will be to redraw global society in the image that they planned all along. Now, in my new book, Phantom Self, I quote an insider who described the world that was coming in 1969. And what he described, not only in terms of this, but in all the changes we're seeing in human society today, He was spot on, in detail, all those years ago, 1969. And I just mentioned that BBC program about a nuclear exchange involving Russia. And of course, if this Third World War got out of hand, it could very quickly become nuclear. And in 1969, this insider said this: if there were too many people in the right places who resisted this world dictatorship that he said was coming, there might be a need to use one or two, possibly more, nuclear weapons. This would possibly be needed to convince people that we mean business. By the time one or two of those went off, then everybody, even the most reluctant, he said, would yield. He said that, and this is the point of the aftermath, he said that the negotiated peace would be very convincing in a context that the whole thing was rehearsed, but nobody would know it. See, this is what's happening. You know, they call wars theatres of war. And in so many ways, that's what it is. The whole thing's a theatre. It's a game with actors playing their parts. Sometimes they know their parts, and sometimes they're ignorant, but they play their part because of that ignorance. And it's the whole thing is a perception deception, because from perception comes everything. Perception leads to action or no action, or what action, all depending on the perception. So this is a whole mind game to impose a perception of reality and world events upon the public that suits the outcome that these psychopaths want. So this insider went on. People hearing about the peace deal after the war and the nuclear exchange would be convinced that it was a genuine negotiation between hostile enemies who finally had come to the realization that peace was better than war. And I'm going to come to that in a second, because talk about the West, United States, Britain, Russia, China. But it depends what level you're talking about, because things look very different depending on what level you are perceiving this whole situation from. Like I say, I'll come to that in a second. But the demonization of Russia is becoming so blatant and so obviously coordinated. You've got shots of horrific shots of children in Aleppo in Syria now, being blamed for their death and injuries. Russia being blamed for that. And of course, if you drop bombs where people live, you're going to hit people that are civilians. The point is, the United States, Britain, NATO countries have been killing children and maiming children decade after decade after decade, and certainly in the Middle East in more recent times, year after year after year. Iraq, Libya, Afghanistan, Syria. And where was all the outrage then from the Western media about the children killed and maimed by Western bombing? But suddenly, the demonization of Russia suits perfectly the presentation of Russia as the evil one killing children. Where were you? Excuses for journalists when the Western countries were and still are doing it. You have a situation where Saudi Arabia has now said that it would be prepared to put ground forces into Syria. The United Arab Emirates has said the same, and other Arab countries, and these are all, once again, the usual suspects, yawn, yawn, who do whatever the United States and the hidden hand tells them to do. You've had the BBC program, and you've got Russia now saying that it's aware that Turkey is making preparations for an invasion of Syrian territory. And it's all coming together. What I've been saying about this Third World War and the conflict between the West and Russia, China, is that it was planned to be triggered out of the Middle East. And now you have a situation where those very countries, because behind the Assad regime, supporting him with bombing and military support, is Russia, but also supporting the Assad regime is China, and also another target for this hidden hand, Iran. And you've got America in there, you've got Britain in there, you've got France in there, and on the sidelines there, you've got Israel in there too. And so in that small area of the world, Syria, you've got all the potential for what they want to break out. But like I said a few moments ago, there are different levels of looking at this, because knowledge of this global plan for world takeover and the transformation of global society into a Orwellian tyranny and then some, the knowledge of that and the information surrounding that is fiercely compartmentalized. What you're looking at is, well, you can symbolize it in many ways. You can symbolize it as a spider's web with a spider in the middle, and each strand going further out knows less and less and less of what the spider knows, and eventually you won't even know the spider exists if you go far enough out. You can do it as a pyramid with a few people at the top dictating to the pyramid, and further you go down the pyramid, the less and less that people in the pyramid know about what the game is that only those at the top really know. And so when you look at one level of this situation in Syria, you can see it as Russia coming in, Putin coming in, to protect an ally in Assad from blatant attempts to remove him and take over Syria by the West using proxy forces like they did in Libya and elsewhere. You can see it at that level. And on one level, that is happening. But if you go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper into it, you can look at it in another way. The hidden hand that's behind all this, and way beyond the Putins and the Obamas and the Camerons, it has now manipulated the situation it wanted, which was to get Russia and the West in a position where this conflict that they've been planning for so long can break out. And it depends, like I say, what level you're looking at. And here's the doll you would have seen behind me in other videocasts. And appropriately, it's a Russian doll. And if you take that to be symbolic of the world that we see, the world you see on the news, the world you read about in the papers, the world you see in your everyday life, and it seems to be a certain way. In most of it, it seems to be random events, random occurrences, random situations. When actually, if you take that off, you find something else inside And that level knows more than the level I've just shown you. But that level also has a level inside that. And the deeper you go into it, the more those levels will know about what's really going on. Setting the place up with these things now. But there are levels and levels and levels, and it keeps going, and it keeps going, until eventually you reach the point. I think that's the last one, is it? No, there's one more. Appropriate. And another one. And that's really appropriate, because if I put that back on there and hold these two together, that is extraordinarily symbolic, for anyone who reads my books and sees how it works, of how that controls that. And only at that level, deep in the hidden hand, deep in the shadows, only at that level do they know, unless you research your backside off and uncover it, do they know the real game, the real agenda, and what world events are really about and where they're meant to lead. Everyone else in these other levels knows less and less of what that knows. And in the end, you've got many, many people within the system, the so-called establishment, who are every day making a contribution to achieving the ends that wants symbolically, with no idea that exists, let alone what it is manipulating the world to be. And if people don't grasp how the world is controlled from the hidden by people who give evil a bad name, extreme psychopaths with no empathy and couldn't care less about the suffering of anybody. In fact, they enjoy it. If you don't realize that, then you're never going to understand the world. But fortunately, more and more people are beginning to see that the world is not like they thought it was. And the demonization of Russia now is all part of what that symbolically has been planning for decades and decades, and then some.